10 months later, my brother proposed to my fiance, his ex, and I'm furious. Original post date, September 8th, 2023. My 28-year-old brother Mark, who is 26 years old, used to date my fiancée Jen, who is 20 years old. For context, they were created in August 2022. They were only together for a month before he ended things with her because he was tired of being in a relationship and never wanted to settle down. At the time they were dating, I was in another state, so I had no idea he even had a girlfriend. I had no idea who Jen was before meeting her. Jen and I met at a bar when I moved back in October and got along really well. She was easily the most beautiful and intelligent woman I'd ever met, and we met several more times before we made it official. Fast forward to December, and I finally bring her up with my family, proposing to meet her at Christmas. They knew I was in a relationship, but I'm not the most open about my personal life, so I kept information about her to a minimum until I knew how serious we were. My parents asked to see pictures, so they began passing my phone around the dinner table. Mark saw it and exploded, calling me a shit brother for dating his ex-girlfriend and demanding that I break up with her. I refused when I asked Jen about it. She confirmed they dated and told me about their breakup. It took a few weeks, but Mark finally stopped bringing up me dating his ex, and I assumed he was over it. This year, for Jen's birthday, I treated her to a fancy dinner with both of our families and her closest friends, and I asked her to marry me. Mark flipped out again and yelled about me proposing to her, which I and my sisters quickly shut down. The incident occurred this past weekend. Mark had been relatively quiet about the situation for the past 2 months. I didn't see him very often, so I assumed he kept low contact with me, which I didn't mind. Then he invited me and Jen to a family dinner at his apartment with my parents and sisters. I thought it was strange, but my parents and sisters were also going, so we decided to go. We had a nice dinner, nothing too fancy, and then moved to the living room to talk. Mark stood up about 30 minutes into our normal conversation and informed us that he had an announcement. He gave a long speech about how happy he was to have his family present for his big moment, then got down on one knee and pulled out this cheap ring, asking Jen to marry him. Jen was perplexed and clearly uncomfortable, so she demanded that he put it away and stand up. My father tried to grab Mark, but I got there first and punched him. I won't repeat much of it because I was too angry to listen. Most of it, but he said something along the lines of wanting to show me that Jen wasn't really into me and just wanted to get back at him before things got worse. My parents rushed me out and promised to speak with him. "It's been a few days since it happened and I'm still mad. I'm not sure what to do at this point. I'm concerned that Jen will reconsider marrying me because of this. Any advice? Later in the day, edit the same post. First, thank you for reading and responding." I read the comments between last night and this morning, and there were some valid points made. There is no update because Jen and my little sister are the only people I've spoken with since that dinner. I'd like to clarify a few points I saw in the comments. Jen and I are newly engaged. It was one of those moments when we both realized we were in it for the long haul. I'm confident in her, no matter how fast things moved. When we met, I approached her, not the other way around. I'm not sure if she was aware of our relationship or suspected it. I asked after discovering they dated, and she said she had no idea. I had no reason to doubt that, but Mark's apparent overreaction does raise some concerns. I had no idea she and Mark were dating when I met her. Mark and I are not close at all. We used to be, but as we got older, we drifted apart and talked less. Before I moved back, we didn't talk much except for special occasions like his or my birthdays. Jen knew little about my family until I decided to introduce them to her when she and Mark met again. I didn't detect any residual feelings in either part. She didn't treat him like a stranger, but she also didn't show him too much affection. I was told that this was only a month-long relationship. I didn't think I needed Mark's permission to ask her to marry me, but perhaps I was mistaken. I am not sure. That being said, I intend to speak with Mark this weekend to lay everything out on the table and figure out what's happening. I never inquired about his side of their relationship, which is my fault for not doing my research. If anything significant or enlightening occurs, I will provide an update. But for now, that's all I have. Relevant comments. Don't give in to the Buddy's family comment. Fortunately, aside from my mother and a few others, I haven't heard much about his family. and they know me well enough to know that our relationship isn't enough for me to tolerate his disrespect, particularly towards my fiancé. They'd be wasting their time with fiancé. Yeah, I don't think I need to worry about her returning. She can't stand him either. LOL. Updated 2 days later on September 10th, 2023. First and foremost, I'd like to thank everyone for reading. It's been a busy weekend, so I haven't had time to respond to everyone, but I did edit in answers to the most common questions I saw in the original post comments. Once again, thank you. I appreciate it all, including the criticism. Now for an update. I called Mark and asked him to meet me at my place to talk. I told him I would prefer Jen to be present for the conversation, but I was fine if he didn't want her there. He agreed to speak with both of us and arrived at my place around noon today. It was relatively quiet for a few minutes before I began the conversation. I apologized for not warning him that I was proposing to Jen, as well as for hitting him. He said whatever, but he appreciated the apologies. When I asked Jen about the relationship and breakup, I told him what she said and asked him to confirm it. I pretty much stated that his reaction has been extreme throughout this entire situation, and I wanted to make sure I wasn't misinterpreting their relationship or downplaying how serious it was. He confirmed that they only dated for a few weeks and ended their relationship because he lost interest. However, I asked if he was acting this way because he still had feelings or regrets about breaking up with her. He admitted that he thought she looked more attractive than the last time he saw her, but he had no feelings or regrets. He explained that he simply did not like seeing a girl he had dated, even if it was only for a short time with his older brother. And, as a man, I should not have violated his trust by pursuing a relationship with his ex. I reminded him that I had no idea they dated, so I didn't do it on purpose, despite knowing their history together. He brushed me off, saying it didn't matter. I still should have broken it off. He insisted that if the roles were reversed, he would have done the same thing, which I doubted. I asked him why he proposed to her if he had no lingering feelings. Basically, to summarize, he was discussing it with one of his buddies who was around when Mark and Jen dated, and the guy came up with the idea that Jen knew we were related from the start and was doing this to get back at him, given Jen had hung up on him after they broke up. He and his friend decided to test it and see if they were correct. So he came up with the idea of proposing and seeing if she dumped me for him, but she asked him to elaborate on why he thought she was hung up on him, and he told her that he heard she was asking about him after the breakup and still hanging out at the places they used to go to. So it was a valid assumption, and her appearance with his brother confirmed his suspicions. Jen told him she'd only asked about him once after the breakup, and she'd been hanging out at those places with friends before they started dating, so she wouldn't avoid them just because of a breakup. She also told him she was offended that she would go so far as to pursue me just to get back at him. He shrugged and offered her a half-hearted apology, but insisted she see it from his perspective. He asked her if she truly didn't know, and she replied that she didn't notice the resemblance in us until we were in the same room, and we asked nothing similar. So it never crossed her mind, and he said, fine. That pretty much concluded the conversation. He did tell me before he left that I could decline his invitation to the wedding because he can't bring himself to support our relationship after dating her. I told him he didn't have to worry about it because he was most likely going to be rejected anyway. I feel better after our conversation. My parents are not pleased that he was not invited, but they understand that it was a mutual decision and probably for the best. My sisters said they knew he didn't have a good reason for being an asshole, and they don't blame me for not wanting him at the wedding right now. I am going to limit my contact with Mark, and I doubt he will contact me anytime soon. I quote like to thank everyone again for reading and commenting, and if anything significant happens, I'll update again. Relevant comments. Why didn't you know about your family? We hadn't talked much about my family in the beginning of our relationship. I left home to avoid them, particularly my parents, and began reconciling at my sister's request when I decided to return home. When Jen asked, I was honest about not being close with them, and she was fine with being kept in the dark given the circumstances. Update posts 2 and 3, November 11th, 2023, 2 months later. Editor's note. OU posted both of these updates in the same post, but update 3 would have occurred approximately 2 weeks after update 2. He just combined both updates into a single post. If I had to guess, it was likely because one of his updates was removed or left in limbo on a subreddit. I couldn't post this in the same forums, so I'm posting it directly to my profile in case anyone wants an update. It's been a while since I posted, but a few things have happened since my last conversation with Mark, so I haven't had much contact with him since then. I haven't called him, and he hasn't called me, so our only interactions have been in a family setting. My mother is now upset because Mark is still not invited to my wedding. It all started with a comment made on my younger sister Sophie's 22 first birthday. Her boyfriend of about 4 years proposed to her at the end of the night, and we sat around talking about what she wanted for her dream wedding. She mentioned wanting a destination wedding and her ideas for the cake and dress. Then she said something like, "Teddy, I know Mark is banned from your wedding, but you won't mind if he attends mine, right?" I laughed it off and told her I couldn't be mad at her guest list even if I wanted to. My mother gave me a strange look and asked if Mark was still not invited to my wedding. I said yes, and she became irritated. She told me she thought I was joking and that banning him from the wedding was unreasonable because he has family. She accused me of holding a grudge for petty reasons. I reminded her that he and I had agreed to him not coming. I then told her that this wasn't the time to talk about my wedding because the day was about Sophie, and that if Mark or she wanted to talk about it later, they could call me. Sophie chastised my mom for trying to make her special day about Mark, and my mother dropped the problem. For those who may be wondering, Mark wasn't Sophie's party because he apparently had to work and couldn't attend a few days later. My mother came to my house and said she wanted to talk about my wedding. She asked why I was so adamant about Mark not attending my wedding. She said I shouldn't be so concerned about Mark and Jen's previous relationship and that uninviting him was going too far. I informed her that Mark and I had mutually agreed that he would not attend the wedding and that he could contact me directly if he had any concerns. We had an argument, and she said that if I didn't re-invite Mark, she wouldn't come because I was ostracizing her son. I shrugged and told her that if that's what she wanted, she could throw her invitation in the trash because I wouldn't beg her to attend. She asked if I was okay with her not attending, and I told her that it wouldn't be the first time she missed one of my events due to Mark. She stormed out after saying I was making an offer and pointing out her past mistakes. I then began receiving messages and phone calls from her and a few family members about the situation, claiming I was in the wrong and urging me to invite Mark simply to keep the peace. Jen has also received messages from my mother requesting that she speak with me and persuade me to change my mind, but she has yet to respond. The majority of my mother's family is supporting her and will not attend, whereas my father and his side of the family, which consists of only my aunt and uncle and their 2 children, agree with me and will continue to attend. My sisters are also still attending the wedding. And of course, Jen's family as well. I discussed it with Mark and asked if he had any concerns about not receiving an invitation. He claimed he uninvited himself in the first place, and he doesn't understand why they're making such a big deal. Because he still doesn't want to go. He told me to leave him out of the fight because he is not involved, and he said he would tell her the same thing. I'm back to keeping low contact with my mother, but my father and I are still on good terms. I'm not sure if I'll invite my mother and her family again. Should they change their minds about the boycott? But the chances are slim. I also told my father, and he understands for the time being. Jen and I started thinking about downsizing the venue because the guest list is much smaller. Update 3. My mother has been barred from attending the wedding indefinitely, just 2 weeks after deciding not to go. She arrived, stopped by, and said she wanted to clear the air and discuss everything. We agreed and invited her to join us for dinner. Jen made her a plate of food, and I asked if she was still planning on not attending the wedding. She stated that, as much as she wants to, she can't get over me not inviting Mark due to a simple mistake. I reminded her that it was a simple mistake to propose to my fiance while I was sitting less than 3 feet away from him, and she said it was just a joke. Jet questioned why she wanted to talk if she was still adamant about Mark attending the wedding. She said she wanted to talk to Jen, and she hoped Jen would listen and persuade me to invite Mark again. She apparently assumed I was at work and could catch her alone. Jen politely informed her that she understood her thought process, but she would not have had that conversation without me present. This is about my brother. My mother said something along the lines of Jen being spineless and unable to have a conversation without me thinking for her, which sparked a heated exchange between the three of us before Jen told her to leave. She stood up and began walking towards the door, and my mother followed, still screaming at her. She now yelling about tearing our family apart. Jen was unlocking the front door when my mother grabbed her hair and dragged her to the ground, still screaming. She hit her and tried to claw her face, so I dragged her off and threw her outside. She banged on the door for a few minutes while I checked on Jen before leaving, and she called both of us several times. When I was certain Jen was fine, I texted my mother and told her not to bother reaching out again because we would never speak with her again. I called my father and sisters and told them what had happened to my father. They were surprised and tried to make excuses, claiming she had been stressed about the situation for a long time. My sister claims they knew she'd snap eventually because she's always been a crazy bi, and they promised to come and make sure Jen was okay. I asked Jen if she wanted to press charges, but she declined, saying she only wanted to cut off contact with her permanently. I told her that while that was obvious, she should still contact the police because she had been physically confronted. But she doesn't want my mother to be arrested. Fortunately, my sisters and Jen's mother came by to comfort her, so she is doing well. Unless Jen says otherwise, my mother is completely blocked on everything. I honestly don't know what to do now. Jen does not want to go to the police because she would feel guilty if she was arrested for this. But my sisters and I want her to include at least one piece of documentation in case something happens in the future. Relevant comments. All of this could have been avoided if Mark had sat down with your mother and accepted responsibility. He certainly could, but I don't believe he understands what accountability means. I truly believe he believes he has nothing to do with our mother's actions, and I doubt anything I say will persuade him that everything she does is for his benefit in her own selfish game. On November 12th, Luke comments to someone about how they should really press charges. Jen is still opposed to formal charges, but after reading some of your comments and a lengthy discussion about how this could escalate, she agreed to have it documented with the police in case she wants to talk to my father about possibly getting her back in therapy or receiving some kind of treatment for her erratic behavior. And, of course, we are moving forward with no contact. Clarification regarding the November 13th, 2023 title. Here is some background on my relationship with my parents. Some people had questions about my mother and my decision not to tell Jen about my relationship with my parents. I figured I could explain why we're so strained. As some of you mentioned, Mark was the golden child. Mark was my mother's baby boy, and she didn't do much to hide it. They did not spend much time with my sisters and me, as most parents do with their children, unless they had to. But they'd spend as much time as possible with Mark, such as taking him shopping while we stayed with a babysitter, or bringing him home his favorite food and toys from the store when they went shopping alone. He usually got better things than the rest of us, such as new, expensive clothes, whereas ours were thrifted or new toys specifically for him, as opposed to old toys we had to share. If my sisters and I received gifts, they were meant to be shared. But my mother made it clear that Mark's belongings were only for him, and we should not touch them. When Mark messed up, I was punished for not being a good role model and showing him how to behave. For example, Mark went through a phase of breaking his toys, and I received a beating because he clearly learned the behavior from me. When Mark was 8 years old, he got in trouble at school for attempting to push a student downstairs. I was grounded for 2 weeks and instructed to apologize to the child for not teaching my brother. When I turned 13, I pushed my parents to start giving me an allowance. They agreed that as long as I did household chores like mowing the lawn, taking out the trash, raking leaves, and so on, I could earn around $25 per week to start saving. Mark noticed that I was receiving money and begged my parents for an allowance rather than having him work $10 of my allowance. Money was given to him every week because we did such an excellent job with our chores that he never touched it. Whenever I asked him to help, he said it wasn't his job to do chores, so why bother? Around this time, I started to distance myself from my brother. By the time I started high school, we only talked to each other when we needed small favors, or when it was absolutely necessary. When I turned 17, I got my first job because I wanted to finally have my own car and earn money that they couldn't force me to give to Mark. Maggie, my oldest sister, assisted me in opening my own bank account and teaching me how to properly budget and save money. After a lot of hard work, I was able to purchase my first car at the age of 18. When Mark got his license, my parents asked me if he could use my car to get around and practice driving. I am reluctant. I agreed, and the arrangement worked well for a while. Mark used my car when I wasn't using it and helped keep it in good condition. When he asked my parents to buy him his own car, my mother approached me and told me to give him my car because he needed it more. When I refused, she threatened to throw me out. We had a fight that night, and she gave Mark my car and took me to transfer ownership to him within the next few days. Since I didn't have anywhere else to go at the time, I just sucked it up and signed it over. My parents did not attend my high school graduation because Mark did not want to sit through a lengthy ceremony just to see me receive a piece of paper, and my mother did not want to leave him alone for the night. So all I had was my sister's support and my aunt and uncle's willingness to take me out. They had to bring me home at my parents' request because they had made me dinner to make amends. I couldn't eat dinner because my mother served shrimp and chicken on the same dish, and I'm allergic to shellfish. Then, my first year out of high school, I worked 2 jobs to buy myself another car, and at the start of the next school year, I moved away for college and lost touch with them. For the first few months, my mother mostly attempted to contact me via social media and Sophie, but I never responded, and I told Sophie she would be cut off as well if she continued to try. When she couldn't reach me through Sophie, she tried my older sister Charlotte, Maggie, and Mark several times before I threatened to file a restraining order for harassment. It was a bluff because I had no idea how to do it, but it worked to scare her away, and all I got from her were happy holiday texts over the years. Around the time I moved back, Charlotte informed me that they had been seeing a family therapist at Charlotte's request, and my parents wanted to apologize for their treatment of us. I was hesitant, but agreed as long as they were genuine, and the reconciliation process began when I returned home. That barely scratches the surface of what they put me through, and it took a lot for me to even begin to let them back into my life. When I met Jen, I had no idea where my relationship with her or with my parents was going. I didn't want to bring up my family, mainly because I was prepared to cut contact again if necessary. Jen understood that it was a sensitive subject and did not press for more information. I hope this clarified some of the questions I've been seeing. Pop up a relevant comment about why you didn't have reconciliation. It depended on them reimbursing him for the car, and getting reimbursement for the car wasn't a hill I was willing to die on because the damage had been done. Even now, it's difficult to believe Mark was the favorite. There was nothing particularly unique about him. I do not mean that as an insult either. He was just a normal kid. My parents were not experiencing fertility issues. He was neither a miracle nor a meal ticket. They weren't dealing with marital issues and using a baby as a bandage. He was only born, and they decided to love him more than us. And believe me, they didn't consider this normal. They simply have a soft spot for our parents because they are parents and believe they have redeeming characteristics. Are you sure you are not adopted and biological? Unfortunately, they couldn't refuse me even if they wanted to. I used to make excuses for them. But after a while, I realized they're just 2 people who shouldn't have had children. Update post for November 30th, 2023, 17 days later. I'd like to thank everyone who has taken the time to give me advice on what to do next, as well as all of the kind messages and comments I've received over the last few days or weeks. Jen and I have read the comments together, and we appreciate everything. To answer the most frequently asked question about why I decided to reconnect after everything, the short answer is that I would do anything for my sisters. Charlotte wanted her entire family present for the birth of her first child, and to assist her as she adjusted. She did not want part-time aunts and uncles who would only visit her child on birthdays and holidays. Growing up, she never asked for much. So when she asked if I'd be willing to try for her, I said yes because it would make her happy. I also believe a part of me hoped that they had changed. I don't regret trying to reconcile either. My parents are still terrible, but I've met the love of my life, so I consider it a win. A few people asked if there was an update, so here we go. Sorry if this is a mess or confusing. A lot has happened. We filed a report with the police and were told that, while Jen does not want to pursue anything, it is not up to us to decide whether it goes any further, but they will keep our preference in mind. We provided some decent evidence of the assault, including photos of Jen's face and text messages with my parents discussing what happened. We were advised to report and record any further incidents with my mother in case anything else occurred. Considering where we live, I doubt it will go anywhere, but at least we have it on record. I got about 100 angry text messages that tell me they at least spoke with her regarding the incident. My mom tried to corner me leaving my job and screamed at me about trying to ruin her life. She kept screaming that I was an awful son for trying to get her arrested over a small misunderstanding, and she didn't understand what she'd done to deserve being punished like this. I told her that if she didn't like being in legal trouble, then she shouldn't have hit Jen. She demanded I tell the police to forget the report, which I refused. I told her exactly what the officer said about it being out of my hands. She had a tantrum in the parking lot and hit me a few times just on the chest and arm before security intervened and dragged her off the property. I had to talk to my boss about the incident. Luckily, she was understanding of everything going on after I explained what was happening. When I got home, I told Jen what happened. She was upset and requested that we discuss the plan with my family going forward. It was a lengthy discussion, but we followed the advice of some Redditors and decided to leave completely. I have no contact with my family other than my sister. We agreed that having them in my life causes unnecessary stress for both of us, and we aren't even married yet. She expressed an interest in moving away and separating herself from my family. She stated that she tried to stay out of my family issues because it was not her place, but she refuses to put up with my mother and her behavior, or my father enabling her mistreatment. There was far too much to say for this post, but I agreed with her that they were more trouble than they were worth. I don't want to put up with this anymore. I also agreed to go to therapy, and she is assisting me in finding a therapist. Following our conversation, I decided to call my father and inform him that I would be leaving. No contact. He didn't answer the first time I called, so I left a message asking for a long conversation. When he called back, he asked if it was okay for my mother to join the conversation. I told him it was fine because she needed to hear what I had to say too. The conversation went about as well as you would expect. I informed them both that Jen and I were cutting them out of our lives. My father demanded to know why I would do something like that. After going through all of the trouble of repairing our relationship, I told him that this whole situation with Mark has shown me that nothing is actually repaired between us, and as far as they are concerned, the world revolves solely around my mother and my younger brother. I told them that their continued favoritism of Mark had brought our relationship to a point of no return, and that I didn't want to stay in a failing relationship. I told them that I agreed to reconcile for Charlotte's sake, but I don't appreciate all of the disrespect directed at me and Jen, and that I would not tolerate it any longer for both of our sakes. I told my mother specifically that I was tired of her using me as a scapegoat for her poor parenting and Mark's attitude. I also told her that I would never forgive her for what she did to Jen, as well as to me and my sisters when we were younger. She began to say that I should move on like my sisters, but I interrupted her and told her that she should accept their forgiveness and move on because she would never receive it from me, especially after everything she has done in the last few weeks. She began crying and questioned how I could treat her like such a villain. I told her that she could only be upset with herself because I had done nothing wrong. She cried harder, telling me how much she regretted having me and how I had only tried to ruin her life. This sparked another heated argument between her and Jen, who told her in much more colorful language that she was disgusting and called her a variety of other nice names for saying such things to me. I quote, Not sure if she left the room or simply decided to shut up, but my mother stopped talking when Jen finished speaking with her. My father expressed his displeasure with being shut out of my life and asked me to try to understand my mother's point of view. He stated that she was also struggling because her children were fighting, and that punishing her for her difficulties in raising and caring for them was unfair. The last thing he said was that we were a family, and I shouldn't let our past mistakes prevent us from moving forward. I told him that the only people she ever cared about were Mark and herself, and there was nothing he could say or do to convince me otherwise. I told him that it was up to him whether to keep my phone number, but that I would block him and my mother everywhere and would not be contacting them again. Then I hung up. Afterward, I sent a long email to my entire family with a link to my posts attached, uninviting everyone except my aunt and uncle and sisters to the wedding. I hadn't cried in a long time, but Jen held me while I cried after sending the email and assured me that everything would be fine. My sisters also contacted me after reading the email. I apologized to Charlotte for not being able to continue reconciling as she had hoped, but she said it was fine, and it wasn't my fault I had to cut them off again. My family's response has been mixed. Some people are angry. I discussed family issues on a public internet forum, and others are upset with my parents because they had no idea things were so bad. The last person I spoke with about everything was Mark. He asked if I was also cutting him off, and I told him no, but I wouldn't go out of my way to reach out to him. He didn't argue and simply wished me luck with the wedding, and we haven't spoken since. Jen and I are currently looking for a new place to stay. The plan is to get closer to Jen's brother. He lives about 3 hours away from where we are now, and Jen and I like the city he is in. I spoke with my boss about transferring, and Jen is looking into the possibility of working entirely remotely or finding another job. Once again, our venue has changed. Because the guest list is significantly smaller, my fool is thinking about letting us use his lake house for our wedding. I don't intend to post about this again unless the sky falls, or at least not until the wedding, because I want to move on. But I will try to answer any questions you may have. Thank you, and happy holidays. Edit. It took a few days to post this, and I had to keep removing details before I could post. If anything is unclear, I will answer as many questions as possible. Relevant comments. Your mother might try to figure out where you moved. I'm already anticipating the aftermath of the move. She'll follow us wherever we go because she's that crazy. When she does not get her way, she becomes obsessive and is forced to stop. I spoke with a lawyer friend of mine about getting a restraining order to stop her before she started. Has Mom read the comments? Sophie has read a lot of them and believes Reddit strangers have no right to tell her she is a bad person, LOL. I don't think there's any more amending in me. I wish them the best for me and my family. The most recent update came on September 29, 2024, 10 months later. Hello, everyone. It has been a minute since I last posted here. Things have been busy, but I've received a few requests for an update. It's small, but here it is. I have a wife and a newborn daughter. Now smile. We found out Jen was pregnant around the time I wrote my last post, which pushed us into overdrive in terms of moving away and starting over in a new location. I was able to transfer to another location, and Jen found a new job here that allows her to work remotely. We were married 4 months ago at her brother's lake house. We hadn't planned on having the ceremony so soon, but neither of us wanted to wait for the baby to arrive before getting married. Jen also discovered a dress she adored but didn't want to grow into. It was a small ceremony attended mostly by her family, but my sister's aunt and uncle were also present. I know some people expected to hear about a huge party at my wedding, but it was easily one of the most memorable days of my life. My daughter was born early last month. She is beautiful, happy, and healthy. Jen is also doing okay. The final stretch of her pregnancy was difficult for her, both emotionally and physically, but she has been feeling better since giving birth. She is seeing a doctor on a regular basis during the postpartum period due to pregnancy complications. However, she does not currently have any major health concerns. Aside from complaining about doctor visits, I don't recall seeing a frown on her face since we brought our daughter home. I haven't heard from my father, but my mother did contact me a few days after the wedding. Apparently, my uncle sent them some of the photos from the wedding. My mother created a fake Facebook page and began spamming Jen and me with angry messages about being excluded from both the wedding and Jen's pregnancy. She went on a long rant about her right to be a part of her grandchild's life and how unfair it was that she couldn't be with us. She asked to come visit us, demanded that we visit her, and even requested to be in the delivery room, all of which I promptly denied. I took screenshots and emailed them to myself in case I needed them for a pillow in the future. Then I blocked her. I haven't heard from her since, but I know she's been pestering my sisters to talk to her. I'm not sure what they're doing about it, but I made it clear that we don't have anything to discuss with her. For those wondering if Mark and I have communicated, the answer is yes. He called after we returned from our honeymoon to congratulate us on our marriage and pregnancy. We did have a lengthy discussion about everything that happened. I won't go into detail, but we both had a lot to say, and he did offer me and Jen what appeared to be a genuine apology for what he did. We've been texting occasionally since our conversation. Mostly small talk and life updates. But he did invite me to join him for a drink the next time I'm in town. I'm not sure whether I'll accept it, but I told him I'd think about it. Thank you for your support and well wishes. I apologize if this update was disorganized. Just to be clear, before anyone asks, Mark has no idea where I live and will most likely never know if he chooses to keep my parents up to date on my life. That is entirely up to him. I won't give him any information he could use to help them appear unannounced. Unfortunately, even if we can form a relationship, I will never be able to completely trust him. Oops. Commenter. Congratulations to you and Jen on adding this new member to your family. That is amazing news to hear. We knew your mother would become extremely upset after receiving both news, and she made it known to the entire world. Word of advice document. Everything she does and says sends. You never know if a cease and desist order is coming your way. Let us hope not. But it's better to be safe than sorry. Congratulations again, and enjoy all those newborn snuggles. They're the best. Oop, hey, thanks. Smile. Being a new father has made me anxious, but I believe I'm doing a good job. I've been enjoying all of the snuggles, spit, and tears she's been offering. I'm not surprised to hear from her, but I've been documenting everything per my lawyer's advice. I hope we don't need the PO, but anything could happen.